Okay, so picture this. It's a regular Tuesday morning at the Louvre in Paris. Tourists are taking selfies with the Mona Lisa. Someone's arguing about where the bathroom is in broken French. A school group is being herded past Egyptian artifacts like bored teenagers everywhere. And outside, a group of thieves is casually rolling up in a basket lift. You know, the kind construction workers, like they're just there to fix a window or change a light bulb or something equally mundane. Except they're not fixing anything. They force open a window, smash some display cases, and make off with some of the most spectacular pieces of jewellery in France. We're talking emeralds the size of your thumb that once belonged to Napoleon's wife, sapphires that adorned two different queens of France, diamonds that survived revolutions and world wars, and enough Imperial drama to fill a Netflix series, jewellery that literally made history in broad daylight at one of the most famous museums in the world. It's basically the plot of Ocean's 11, except it actually happened, and instead of George Clooney in a tuxedo coordinating elaborate heist choreography, it's some guys with a basket lift and absolutely zero chill. Tonight, we're diving into exactly what was stolen, because honestly, the provenance of these pieces is way more dramatic than the heist itself. We've got Marie Louise's emeralds that she smuggled out of France when Napoleon's empire collapsed in 1814. We've got sapphires that pass through so many royal hands they basically need their own genealogy chart. We've got Empress Eugenie's pearl and diamond wedding tiara that somehow survived exile, ended up owned by a German prince whose family made their fortune delivering mail, and eventually sold at Sotheby's in 1992 for a price that would make your eyes water. If you're watching with tired eyes and an overthinking mind, this story is for you. If you really enjoy these bedtime journeys through history, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I always love knowing where these stories are keeping you company. Let's talk about the jewels that are now somewhere in the world, probably wrapped in a towel in someone's trunk, causing an international incident and giving Interpol a collective migraine. So here's what we know about how this actually went down. And honestly, it's both impressively audacious and deeply stupid at the same time. It's daytime, not late at night when the museum is closed and dark. Daytime. The museum is open to the public. There are tourists everywhere, taking photos, complaining about their feet, arguing about which gallery to visit next. There are guards patrolling, security cameras recording, alarm systems active, all the things that should theoretically prevent someone from just strolling in and stealing priceless national treasures. But apparently, if you show up with a basket lift and look like you belong there, like you're part of some maintenance crew or window washing service, you can just do whatever you want. It's the same energy as walking into an office building with a clipboard and a reflective vest. Carry a ladder and wear the right outfit and nobody questions you. You could probably walk into a nuclear facility with a hard hat and a serious expression, and security would just wave you through. Oh, he's clearly here to fix something important. Carry on. The thieves used the basket lift to reach an upper window, probably one that's not visible from the main tourist area, somewhere on a side of the building where people don't usually look. They forced it open, climbed inside, and went straight for the jewelry gallery. And here's what tells us this wasn't some opportunistic smash and grab. They knew exactly what they wanted. This wasn't a ooh shiny things, let's take everything situation. They had a shopping list. They went directly to specific display cases. They ignored other valuable pieces and took only certain items: the emeralds, the sapphires, the tiara, the bow, the brooch. They smashed the display cases, probably with something heavy and efficient, not wanting to waste time, grabbed the pieces, and got out. The whole thing probably took less than 10 minutes. Now here's where it gets weird and also kind of hilarious. On their way out, they dropped something. The crown of the Empress. Just dropped it. It broke. And instead of stopping to pick up the pieces, because apparently even thieves in the middle of a heist have standards about what's too broken or too awkward to bother with. They just left it there and ran. Which is honestly kind of funny because the crown they dropped was made for the 1855 Paris Exposition and had never even been worn by the Empress. It was created as a display piece, a symbol of imperial power and French craftsmanship. It was meant to sit under glass and look impressive, not to actually be worn to events. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong. Gold, diamonds, emeralds, imperial eagles. But it's also basically jewelry as propaganda. The stuff they did take, though, that was worn by actual empresses, at actual balls and state dinners and official portraits, while making actual political decisions and alliances. These pieces have been on actual historical bodies during actual historical moments. Marie Louise's emeralds were at Napoleon's wedding in 1810. Hortense's sapphires were worn by Marie Amélie when she was Queen of France. Eugenie's tiara was at her wedding to Napoleon III in 1853. These aren't just pretty objects, they're witnesses to history. Let's talk about what makes this heist interesting from a strategic standpoint, because the thieves' selectivity tells us a lot. The Louvre's jewelry collection is absolutely massive. We're talking about thousands of pieces spanning thousands of years. They've got ancient Egyptian jewelry, gold collars and lapis lazuli scarabs and things that were buried with pharaohs. They've got medieval reliquaries encrusted with gems and containing bits of saints. They've got Renaissance jewels, Baroque pearls, Art Nouveau brooches, Art Deco rings. Basically every era, every style, every type of jewelry you can imagine. The thieves could have grabbed Roman gold rings that are 2,000 years old. They could have taken Byzantine enamel work. They could have grabbed Art Deco pieces from the 1920s that are valuable and relatively portable. But they didn't. They went specifically for 19th century French imperial jewelry. All of it from the Napoleonic era and the Second Empire. All of it tied to empresses and queens. All of it with impeccable, thoroughly documented provenance. Which tells us something interesting. These thieves either did extensive homework themselves, or they were working for someone who did. They knew which pieces would be most valuable, not just in terms of the raw materials, though obviously emeralds and diamonds and sapphires are worth a lot, but in terms of historical significance and collectability. They knew which stones were the most impressive. Colombian emeralds are more valuable than emeralds from other sources. Ceylon sapphires have a particular color and quality that makes them desirable. Large, well-matched pearls are rare and expensive. They knew which pieces had the best stories attached. Napoleon's wedding gift, jewelry owned by 2 queens. Empress Eugenie's wedding tiara, a brooch containing diamonds from Cardinal Mazarin's legendary 17th century collection. Think about it. They didn't take tiaras from minor nobility, pieces that might be pretty, but don't have famous owners or dramatic histories. They didn't take jewelry that had been in the collection for centuries, but wasn't particularly well known. They took the pieces, the ones with name recognition, the ones that would make headlines. Marie Louise's emeralds, the ones Napoleon commissioned as a wedding gift when he divorced Josephine and married an Austrian archduchess to secure an heir. Hortense's sapphires, owned by 2 queens of France, passed through the Orléans family for 155 years. Eugenie's most spectacular pieces, her pearl and diamond wedding tiara, her diamond bow that once belonged to Mrs. Astor of New York, her brooch with Mazarin's diamonds. These are museum-quality pieces with museum-quality price tag and museum-quality fame, which makes them incredibly hard to sell on any legitimate market, but also incredibly desirable if you're a certain type of collector, the kind who has a private vault and doesn't care about little details like international law or stolen property or crimes against cultural heritage. Let's put this in context, because jewelry heists are actually pretty common. People have been stealing sparkly things since sparkly things were invented. But this one is different in some interesting ways. Most jewelry heists target private collections or commercial jewelry stores, places where the security might be decent, but isn't at the level of a major national museum. The thieves break in at night, maybe disable some alarms, grab whatever they can carry, and get out. The pieces, while valuable, usually aren't internationally famous. The thieves can break up the jewelry, sell the individual stones through various channels, and move on with their lives. Some heists target royal or aristocratic collections during transport, when pieces are being moved between locations for exhibitions or sales, and are temporarily more vulnerable than they would be in a permanent, secured location. There was a famous case in Sweden in the 1990s where thieves stole jewelry from a royal exhibition, including pieces belonging to the Swedish royal family. They managed it because the pieces were in a temporary exhibition space with lighter security than the permanent royal collection. Some of those pieces were eventually recovered, some weren't. Then there are the truly spectacular, legendary heists that become part of cultural history, the ones people make documentaries and movies about. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum robbery in Boston in 1990 is probably the most famous. Thieves dressed as police officers showed up at 1 a.m. claiming to be responding to a disturbance, and the guards let them in. The thieves tied up the guards and spent 81 minutes stealing 13 pieces of art worth an estimated $500 million. They took paintings by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Manet, and Degas. They took a Chinese bronze vessel. They took a finial from a Napoleonic flag. Those pieces have never been recovered. It's been over 30 years. They're out there somewhere, probably in private collections, possibly cut out of their frames and rolled up, never to be seen by the public again. The museum still has empty frames hanging on the walls where the paintings used to be, like ghosts of what was stolen. That heist was sophisticated, planned, devastating in its cultural impact. The Antwerp diamond heist in 2003 was another big one. Thieves broke into a vault in the Antwerp Diamond Centre and stole loose diamonds, gold, and jewelry worth over $100 million. They defeated multiple layers of security, including infrared heat detectors, radar, and a lock with 100 million possible combinations. It was called the heist of the century at the time. They eventually caught some of the thieves because one of them had left a half-eaten salami sandwich at the scene with his DNA on it, which is both incredibly stupid and weirdly Italian. The 2018 Green Vault heist in Dresden, Germany, is more recent. Thieves broke into a museum housing Saxon royal treasures and stole 18th century jewelry worth potentially over €1 billion. They cut the power to the streetlights, broke through a barred window, smashed a display case, and grabbed diamond-encrusted pieces that had belonged to Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony. Some of those pieces have been recovered, some are still missing, possibly broken up and sold. So where does the Louvre heist fit in all this? It's not as large scale as the Gardner Museum. They only took jewelry, not paintings or sculptures or other types of art. The total number of items is relatively small: a necklace, earrings, a tiara, a bow, a brooch. Maybe 10 pieces total, depending on how you count. But it's also not a quick grab-and-go situation, like many jewelry store heists. These pieces are so famous, so well documented, so distinctive, that selling them through any legitimate channel would be basically impossible. The authorities have confirmed that all the stolen pieces are from the 19th century and are among the most beautiful and significant items in the Louvre's jewelry collection, which is French official speak for "these are incredibly distinctive, and good luck trying to sell them without every jewelry expert, auction house and Interpol agent in the world recognizing them immediately." Because here's the thing about stealing famous jewelry. It's not like stealing cash, where you can just spend it or deposit it in a bank. Well, in small amounts anyway. It's not even like stealing art, where you can at least keep a painting in your private collection and look at it yourself. even if you can never show it to anyone else. With jewelry this famous, your options are extremely limited. You can't wear it in public. Someone would recognize it. You can't sell it through auction houses or reputable jewelers. They would immediately identify it as stolen. You can't even easily break it up and sell the stones separately because these particular stones are documented. The emeralds from Marie Louise's necklace are Colombian emeralds with specific characteristics, specific sizes, specific qualities. There are detailed photographs, gemological reports, and historical records. The sapphires from Hortense's set are Ceylon sapphires that have been studied and documented. The pearls in Eugenie's tiara, 212 of them, including 17 large pear-shaped ones, are distinctive enough that any expert would recognize them. Every major auction house in the world has these pieces on file. Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonham's. They all have databases of stolen art and jewelry, and these pieces are now flagged in all of them. Every reputable jeweler would recognize these pieces, or at least be suspicious enough to check. Interpol has images circulating to law enforcement worldwide. The Art Loss Register, an international database of stolen art, antiques, and collectibles, now has detailed entries for each piece, with photographs and descriptions. If anyone tries to sell these pieces through legitimate channels, they'll be caught immediately. So whoever took these either has a very specific buyer already lined up, probably a very wealthy private collector who doesn't care about legality and wants to own a piece of history that no one else can see. This buyer would keep the jewelry in a private vault, never wear it, never show it to anyone except maybe a few trusted people. Just own it for the sake of owning something extraordinary and forbidden, which is incredibly sad, honestly, because these pieces have survived centuries of history, revolutions, wars, exiles, regime changes, and now they just sit in a dark vault somewhere forever, never to be seen or studied or appreciated by anyone. The other possibility is that they're planning to break up the pieces and sell the stones separately, which would be absolutely catastrophic from a cultural heritage standpoint. This would mean taking Marie Louise's necklace apart, removing each emerald from its setting, probably resetting them in modern jewelry, or selling them as loose stones. Same with the sapphires, the diamonds, the pearls. The settings, which are works of art in themselves, created by master craftsmen in the 19th century, would likely be melted down for the gold. And everything that makes these pieces special, the craftsmanship, the history, the provenance, the fact that they're intact survivors from the Napoleonic era, would be destroyed forever. And as the last option, the thieves realize they've made a huge mistake and the jewelry gets recovered. Either law enforcement tracks them down through surveillance footage or informants, or the pieces get recognized when someone tries to sell them, or the thieves panic when they realize how impossible it is to actually profit from their crime and they abandon the jewelry somewhere, or even return it anonymously. Honestly, the last option is the most likely, and that's what the authorities are hoping for. Because the reality is, there are only so many billionaire collectors willing to buy stolen imperial jewels, and even fewer who are willing to take the risk of being caught with them. Most very wealthy collectors prefer their luxuries to be legal. The bragging rights aren't worth as much if you can never actually brag about owning the pieces. Here's another angle that's fascinating when you think about this heist: what the thieves didn't steal. The Louvre's jewelry galleries don't contain just the pieces that were taken. There are hundreds of other items on display. Other 19th century pieces, other imperial jewelry, other spectacular diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, rubies, pearls. But the thieves were selective. They took specific items and left others. They left behind some of Empress Eugenie's other jewelry, pieces that were also valuable, also historically significant, also beautiful, but perhaps not quite as spectacular or as famous as the ones they took. They left jewelry from Louis XIV's court, 17th century pieces with their own incredible provenance. They left jewelry from other periods entirely, cases full of ancient Roman jewelry, medieval reliquary, Renaissance jewels, Baroque pieces, Art Nouveau designs. Some of this stuff is worth millions. Some of it is just as old, just as historically significant. But the thieves didn't want it, which means they weren't just grabbing whatever looked valuable. They had specific targets in mind. They had a plan. They knew their weight limits, how much they could physically carry, while also being able to move quickly and climb back through a window and down a basket lift. They knew their size constraints, what would fit in whatever bags or containers they'd brought. They knew which pieces would be worth the risk of stealing from one of the most famous museums in the world, and which ones wouldn't justify that risk. The broken crown, the one they dropped on their way out, was probably pushing the limits of what they could transport. It's large, it's heavy, gold and gemstones aren't light, it's awkwardly shaped. When they dropped it and it broke, they made a calculated decision, not worth going back for. It's damaged, it's bulky, and while it's valuable, it's not as portable or as relatively concealable as the other pieces. The emerald necklace, that rolls up. The sapphire tiara fits in a bag. The diamond bow, practically pocket-sized if you have big pockets. The pearl tiara, awkward but manageable. The brooch, easy. The broken crown, abandon it. It's cold, calculated decision-making that suggests this wasn't amateur hour. These weren't random opportunists who saw an open window and thought, let's see what we can find inside. These were people with a plan, with specific targets, with someone, either themselves or a buyer, who knew exactly what they wanted and had done the research to identify which pieces to take, which makes the whole basket lift in broad daylight thing even more audacious. They took a huge risk, but they did it with a clear strategy. Now let's talk about what they took, piece by piece, because the history of each one is absolutely wild and way more entertaining than the actual heist. Let's start with the big one, the showstopper, the piece that probably made jewelry historians around the world simultaneously gasp and cry when they heard it was stolen, the emerald necklace and earrings that belonged to Marie Louise of Austria, Napoleon Bonaparte's second wife. But before we talk about the jewelry itself, let's set the scene, because context is everything, and the context here is dramatic. Picture Paris in early 1810. Napoleon Bonaparte is at the absolute peak of his power. He's Emperor of France. He's conquered most of Europe, Italy, parts of Germany, Spain, Poland. He's defeated the Austrians, the Prussians, the Russians, well, sort of. The Russia situation will come back to haunt him, but in 1810, he doesn't know that yet. He's redrawn the map of Europe according to his own preferences. He's crowning kings and deposing monarchs. He's basically playing Risk with actual country. He's sitting in palaces that used to belong to Louis XVI. He's surrounded by wealth that would make a modern tech billionaire look like they're shopping at Target. The city of Paris is being transformed under his rule. New bridges, new monuments, new buildings. He's commissioned art and architecture that will last centuries. He has an army that seems unbeatable. He has power that seems unlimited. But he has a problem. Actually, he has one specific problem that's really bothering him. He doesn't have a legitimate heir. His wife, Josephine, the love of his life, the woman he wrote embarrassingly passionate letters to during military campaigns. I don't love you anymore. On the contrary, I detest you. You are a naughty, gawky, foolish Cinderella. That was apparently his idea of sexy correspondence. The woman who was his partner and support through his rise from relatively obscure military officer to Emperor of France cannot give him children. Well, technically, she already had children from her first marriage. She had 2 kids, Eugenie and Hortense. We'll talk more about Hortense later because her jewelry was also stolen. So it wasn't like she was incapable of having children generally. But she was in her 40s now, and she and Napoleon had been married for 13 years, and there were no little Napoleons running around. This was a problem because Napoleon had spent the last decade building an empire, and empires need heirs. He needed a son to inherit his title, his territory, his position. He'd gone from being Napoleon Bonaparte, minor Corsican nobleman, an ambitious military guy, to Napoleon III, Emperor of France. That's a big jump, and he wanted to ensure his dynasty continued. He wanted his son to be Napoleon II, and his grandson to be Napoleon III, and so on forever. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work out that way, though we do eventually get a Napoleon III, just not the way Napoleon Y planned. So Napoleon makes a decision that devastates both of them. He's going to divorce Josephine and marry someone who can give him an heir. The actual divorce ceremony in January 1810 was apparently an emotional disaster. Josephine collapsed. Napoleon cried. Everyone present was uncomfortable. It was the kind of scene where you just want to leave the room and let people process their feelings in private, but you can't, because you're at an official imperial ceremony, and leaving would be a breach of protocol. Napoleon apparently still loved Josephine. She apparently still loved him. But dynasties don't run on love. They run on legitimate heirs. And Napoleon was willing to sacrifice his personal happiness for political necessity. Very dramatic, very tragic. Very much the kind of thing that happens when you try to build an empire based on military conquest, and then realize you need to play by old-school European monarchical rules to legitimize it. So Napoleon needs a new wife, preferably one who is young, fertile, and from an old, established royal family that will make his upstart empire look more legitimate. He chooses Marie Louise of Austria. Let's talk about Marie Louise for a moment, because she's way more interesting than just Napoleon's second wife. She was born in 1791, which makes her 18 years old in 1810, when she marries Napoleon, who is 40. So, there's that. Not unusual for the time period. Royal and aristocratic marriages often involved teenage brides and much older grooms, but still kind of uncomfortable to think about from a modern perspective. She's an Archduchess of Austria, daughter of Francis II, who was Holy Roman Emperor until Napoleon basically forced the Holy Roman Empire to dissolve in 1806. But Francis remained Emperor of Austria, so he still had a fancy title and a lot of territory. Marie Louise grew up in the Austrian imperial court, which means she was surrounded by elaborate ceremony, strict protocol, and the kind of formal education that royal daughters received. Languages. She spoke German, French, Italian, and probably some Latin. Music, art, dancing, needlework. Enough history and geography to understand political situations, and all the social skills necessary to navigate courtly life. She'd been raised in luxury, palaces, servants, the best of everything. But she'd also been raised during a period when Austria was frequently at war with France. Her entire childhood and teenage years, Austria had been fighting Napoleon. On and off, various coalitions, various wars, but the point is, Napoleon was the enemy, the Corsican upstart, the nobody who'd made himself emperor and was now trying to dominate Europe and destroy the old order that families like the Habsburgs represented. In the Austrian court, Napoleon was probably portrayed as something close to the Antichrist, the destroyer of legitimate monarchies, the revolutionary who needed to be stopped. And then one day, Marie Louise's father tells her she's going to marry him. Can you imagine? Your entire life, your parents and tutors and everyone around you has been talking about how this one guy is terrible and evil and threatening everything your family stands for. And then suddenly it's, great news, Marie Louise, you're marrying him, for political reasons, to create an alliance between Austria and France. Isn't diplomacy wonderful? The marriage was arranged as part of a peace treaty. Austria had lost, again, to Napoleon. Francis II needed to make peace. Marrying his daughter to Napoleon was a way to cement the alliance and hopefully ensure Austria wouldn't get invaded again. Spoiler, this doesn't really work long term, but in 1810 it seems like a good idea. Marie Louise apparently was not thrilled about this arrangement, which, fair enough. But she was a dutiful daughter, raised to understand that royal marriages were political arrangements, not love matches. Her personal feelings were irrelevant compared to the needs of the state. The wedding took place in April 1810. There was actually a proxy wedding first in Vienna. Someone stood in for Napoleon because he couldn't be in two places at once. And then Marie Louise travelled to France for the actual wedding and celebrations. Napoleon, to his credit, seems to have genuinely tried to make a good impression on his very young, very nervous bride. He met her before she reached Paris, couldn't wait, apparently, and spent time with her trying to be charming and reassuring. The wedding ceremonies in Paris were absolutely spectacular. Napoleon knew how to throw a party, and this was a major political statement. Look at me, I'm so powerful and legitimate that I married an Austrian archduchess, daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor. The whole city was decorated. There were parades, celebrations, and fireworks. Marie Louise wore white and silver. White wasn't yet the standard wedding dress colour it would become later in the 19th century, but it was fashionable, covered in diamonds and jewels, including her new emerald parure that Napoleon had commissioned as a wedding gift. And this is where we need to talk about François Nitot, because he's the man who created Marie Louise's emeralds, and his role in Napoleonic history is actually pretty significant. Nitot was the founder of what would eventually become the House of Chaumet, which is today one of the most prestigious jewellery houses in the world. But in 1804, when Napoleon crowned himself emperor, Nitot became the official imperial jeweller. Being Napoleon's jeweller was probably simultaneously the opportunity of a lifetime and incredibly stressful. On the one hand, unlimited budget, sort of. Napoleon did have financial constraints despite being emperor, but he wasn't shy about spending money on things that enhanced his image. Historical significance. Your work would be worn by emperors and empresses at major state occasions. Your pieces would be seen and admired by everyone who mattered in European high society. Your name would be associated with one of the most powerful men in the world. On the other hand, Napoleon had very specific ideas about what he wanted, and if you disappointed him, you were disappointing a man who'd conquered most of Europe through sheer force of will and strategic genius. The pressure to create something absolutely perfect must have been immense. Nitot had already created various pieces for Napoleon and the imperial court. He'd made jewellery for Josephine. He'd created crowns and regalia for coronations and ceremonies. He knew what he was doing. For Marie Louise's wedding, Napoleon commissioned not just one jewellery set, but two complete parures. A parure, just to clarify, is a matching set of jewellery. In the early 19th century, a full parure typically included a necklace, earrings, a tiara, or hair ornament, and sometimes additional pieces like brooches, bracelets, or a diadem. Everything matched, everything coordinated. It was very matchy-matchy by modern standards, but that was the style. The idea was that when you went to a fancy event, you wore your entire parure, and everyone could see that you had the wealth and taste to own a complete matching set. It was a display of both fashion sense and financial power. Napoleon commissioned two parures for Marie Louise. Both were created by Nitot using the finest materials and craftsmanship available. One set featured opals. That one is lost to history. It probably got broken up and sold at some point when someone in Marie Louise's family needed money, or when fashions changed and nobody wanted to wear old-fashioned early 19th century jewellery anymore. This is actually pretty common with historical jewellery. Pieces get dismantled, the stones get reset in more modern styles, and the original settings get melted down for the gold. It's tragic from a historical preservation standpoint, but it happened all the time. Opals are beautiful. They have that distinctive play of colour, flashes of rainbow in the stone, but they're also relatively fragile compared to diamonds or sapphires, and they weren't valued as highly as some other gemstones. So if someone needed to sell off jewellery for money, The opal set might have been the first to go. The other set, the one that was stolen last week from the Louvre, was made with Colombian emeralds. And not just any Colombian emerald, the best Colombian emeralds money could buy. Okay, quick gemology lesson, because understanding why Colombian emeralds are special makes this theft even more significant. Emeralds are a variety of beryl, the same mineral family that includes aquamarine, but with chromium and sometimes vanadium that gives emeralds their green color. They've been prized for thousands of years. Cleopatra loved emeralds. The ancient Romans thought they were soothing to look at. They show up in jewelry and royal regalia across multiple cultures and time periods. But not all emeralds are equal. Emeralds come from various locations around the world: Brazil, Zambia, Afghanistan, Russia, and others. They're all green beryl. They're all technically emeralds. But Colombian emeralds are special. Colombia, specifically the Muzo and Chivor mines, produces some of the finest emeralds ever found. And there are specific reasons why Colombian emeralds are considered superior. Colombian emeralds have a particular shade of green that's more vivid, more saturated, more pure than emeralds from most other sources. Gemologists describe it as a pure green, or bluish green, that doesn't have the yellow or brown undertones you might find in emeralds from other locations. When you look at a Colombian emerald, the color just looks right. It's the platonic ideal of what an emerald should be. The Colombian mines have produced some of the largest high-quality emeralds ever found. While emeralds from other locations can be large, they often don't maintain the same level of color and clarity as Colombian stones. Colombian emeralds can be both large and fine quality, which is rare and valuable. They have been famous for centuries. The Spanish conquistadors found them in the 16th century and brought them back to Europe, where they became highly prized in royal collections. The association with Spanish imperial wealth, with the exotic New World, with centuries of prestige, all of that adds to their desirability. In 1810, when Napoleon commissioned Marie Louise's parure, Colombian emeralds weren't just expensive, they were exotic and symbolic. They came from Spain's colonies in South America. They were associated with conquest, with global reach, with the wealth of empires. Napoleon choosing Colombian emeralds was a power move. He was essentially saying, "Look how far my influence extends. Look at the rare and precious things I can acquire. Look at what I can give to my bride. I'm not just Emperor of France. I'm a force on the world stage." Marie Louise's emerald parure contained 32 emeralds total. The necklace featured 10 large emeralds, oval and lozenge-shaped, each probably weighing several carats. These weren't small accent stones. These were statement emeralds, the kind that catch light from across a ballroom. Each emerald was surrounded by diamonds and connected to the others through elaborate goldwork and additional diamonds. The design included diamond palmettes, fan-shaped decorative elements inspired by palm fronds, which were popular in Napoleonic and neoclassical design because they were also used in ancient Greek and Roman art, and Napoleon loved comparing himself to Roman emperors. Between the palmettes, small round emeralds added color and continuity to the design. The necklace also featured 874 brilliant cut diamonds and 264 rose-cut diamonds. Brilliant cut diamonds are what we think of as standard diamonds today. They have 58 facets, counting the culet, arranged in a specific pattern designed to maximize light reflection and sparkle. The brilliant cut was perfected in the early 18th century and became the standard by the 19th century. Rose-cut diamonds are an older style, dating back to the 16th century. They have a flat bottom and a domed top covered in triangular facets, arranged in a rose petal pattern, hence the name. They don't sparkle as intensely as brilliant cut diamonds. They have more of a soft, glowing appearance, but they were still popular in the early 19th century, often used alongside brilliant cuts to create textural variation in jewelry. The combination of brilliant and rose-cut diamonds would have created an interesting play of light, some stones throwing off sharp, intense sparkles, others with a softer glow. The whole necklace would have been set in gold, probably 18 or 22 carat, because that's what you used for important jewelry. Modern jewelry often uses 14K gold because it's more durable. Less gold content means more alloy metals that make it harder, but in the early 19th century, high carat gold was standard for prestigious pieces, and it would have been heavy, not uncomfortably so. Skilled jewelers knew how to balance pieces, but substantial. The kind of necklace where you're aware you're wearing it, the kind that makes a statement just by existing on your body. The earrings matched the necklace in style, emeralds and diamonds in a complementary design, probably with drops or dangles that would move and catch light when the wearer turned her head. This wasn't jewelry you wore to go shopping or take a walk in the garden. This was jewelry for state dinners, official portraits, and major ceremonies, occasions where you needed to look like an empress, where your appearance needed to communicate wealth, power, taste, legitimacy. Marie Louise would have worn this parure at her wedding. She probably wore it at various state functions during Napoleon's reign. Every time she wore it, she was making a visual statement about her position and Napoleon's power. So how did the marriage actually go? By most accounts, Napoleon and Marie Louise got along reasonably well, which might seem surprising given the circumstances. 18-year-old arranged bride, 40-year-old emperor who divorced his first wife and definitely has some psychological quirks. But apparently they made it work. Napoleon seems to have been genuinely smitten with Marie Louise. She was young, pretty, well-educated, polite, everything an empress was supposed to be. And crucially, she wasn't Josephine, which meant there were no painful comparisons or complicated emotional history with this marriage. Marie Louise, for her part, seems to have adjusted better than you might expect. Napoleon treated her well. He was attentive. He gave her gifts and jewelry and attention. He seems to have been faithful to her, which was not always a given with powerful men in this era. Being Empress of France was a huge amount of pressure and responsibility, but it also came with enormous privilege and luxury. And most importantly, in March 1811, almost exactly a year after the wedding, Marie Louise gave birth to a son. Napoleon was absolutely over the moon. He finally had his heir. The little boy was immediately given the title King of Rome, not even waiting for him to grow up. Napoleon would have probably built him his own palace if he'd had time. For a few years, everything seemed perfect from Napoleon's perspective. He had his empire, his empress, his heir. France was powerful. Paris was the center of European culture and politics. The future looked secure. Marie Louise's emeralds were worn at various imperial events during these years. Celebrations, state dinners, official occasions where the empress needed to look spectacular. The emeralds were witnesses to what seemed like an unstoppable empire at its height. And then, everything fell apart. By 1814, Napoleon's empire was crumbling faster than anyone would have thought possible just a few years earlier. The disastrous Russian campaign of 1812 had destroyed much of his army. Then there was the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, also called the Battle of Nations, where a coalition of Austrian, Prussian, Russian, and Swedish forces defeated Napoleon decisively. By early 1814, Allied forces were pushing into France itself. They were approaching Paris. The situation was desperate. In March 1814, Napoleon made the decision that Marie Louise and their son, Napoleon II, the 3-year-old King of Rome, needed to leave Paris. It wasn't safe anymore. Picture Marie Louise at this moment. She's 22 years old. She's been Empress of France for 4 years. Not very long in the grand scheme of things, but long enough to get used to her position, her life, her role. She has a 3-year-old son who is supposedly the heir to an empire, but whose future is suddenly very uncertain. Her husband's empire is collapsing around them. Enemy armies, potentially including armies from her home country of Austria, which is now part of the coalition against France, are marching toward Paris. Everything is falling apart. What do you pack when you're fleeing the collapse of an empire? You can't take everything. There isn't time. There isn't space. You need to move quickly, travel light enough to move fast, but also take things that are valuable and portable enough to serve as resources if you end up needing them. Marie Louise packed the emeralds, not the French crown jewels. Those technically belong to France as state property, not to her personally, and they stayed behind in Paris. Not most of her other possessions, the elaborate dresses, the furniture, the artwork, all the things that made up her life as empress. But the emeralds were hers, personal property, given to her by Napoleon as a wedding gift. They belonged to her, not to the state. She took them. This is actually a really smart move when you think about it. Gemstones are portable wealth. They're small relative to their value. They're durable. They won't get damaged by being packed in a trunk and carried around. They hold their value even when currencies collapse and governments fall, which is exactly what was happening. They can be sold if you need money, used as collateral for loans, traded for necessities. You can't eat emeralds, obviously, but in a crisis, they're one of the best things you can have. Marie Louise fled first to Blois, then eventually back to Austria after Napoleon abdicated in April 1814. She never permanently returned to France. She never saw Napoleon again. Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba. He escaped in 1815, returned to France, ruled for a brief period called the 100 Days, lost the Battle of Waterloo, and was exiled again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he died in 1821. Marie Louise, meanwhile, was given the Duchy of Parma by the Congress of Vienna, the big meeting where European powers reorganized the continent after Napoleon's defeat. She became Duchess of Parma, which was a significant demotion from Empress of France, but still a substantial territory and title. She remarried in 1821 after Napoleon died. Then she remarried again after that husband died. She lived until 1847, dying at age 56. And the whole time, through exile, through becoming Duchess of Parma, through 2 more marriages, through all the changes and upheavals in her life, she kept the emeralds. Think about what these emeralds represented for. They were from her wedding to Napoleon, one of the most dramatic and significant moments of her life, when she went from being an Austrian archduchess to Empress of France. They were a tangible connection to a life that must have seemed increasingly distant and unreal as years passed. She'd been Empress of France for only 4 years, but those 4 years included some of the most dramatic events in European history: the height and fall of Napoleon's empire, the birth of his heir, the collapse of everything he'd built. The emeralds were witnesses to all of it, and they were hers, genuinely, personally hers. In a world where so much of her life had been determined by politics and alliances and the needs of empire, the emeralds were something she'd chosen to take with her, something that belonged to her, regardless of titles or territories. When Marie Louise died in 1847, she bequeathed the emeralds to her cousin, Leopold II, Grand Duke of Tuscany, not to Napoleon II, her son from her marriage to Napoleon Bonaparte, who had been raised in Austria under the title Duke of Reichstadt and who had died young in 1832, never having had any real power or influence despite being Napoleon's son. Not to France or any French institution, not to any of the Bonaparte family, to her Austrian cousin. This tells us something about Marie Louise's identity and how she saw herself by the end of her life. She'd been born an Austrian archduchess. She'd been Empress of France for 4 years. She'd been Duchess of Parma for over 30 years. But when it came time to decide where her emeralds, the most significant jewels she owned, would go, She gave them to an Austrian family. Leopold II was part of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, one of the most powerful and long-lasting dynasties in European history. The Habsburgs had ruled Austria for centuries. They'd held the title of Holy Roman Emperor for most of its history, until Napoleon forced the empire to dissolve. They had territories and influence across Europe. They were exactly the kind of family that knew how to preserve dynastic treasures and pass them down through generations. The emeralds stayed with Leopold's branch of the Habsburg-Lorraine family for over a century, from 1847 to 1953. Let's think about what happened during those 106 years. The emeralds remained with Leopold's branch of the Habsburg-Lorraine family for over a century, from 1847 to 1953. During this period, they survived the revolutions of 1848, the unification of Italy in the 1860s, the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, World War I, the dissolution of Austria-Hungary in 1918, the interwar period with its economic crisis and political instability, World War II, and the aftermath and reconstruction of Europe. Through all of this, wars, revolutions, the collapse of their empire, economic crises, social upheaval, someone in the Habsburg-Lorraine family kept these emeralds safe. They didn't sell them when they needed money, and they probably did need money at various points, especially after losing their empire. They didn't break them up to reset the stones in more fashionable modern jewelry. They didn't lose them in a move or a war or an evacuation. Generation after generation, someone held onto these emeralds and passed them down, preserving them as a family treasure with historical significance. That's extraordinary, honestly. Most jewelry doesn't survive intact for over a century. There are too many opportunities for things to go wrong. Financial crises that require selling assets, changes in fashion that make old jewelry seem outdated, family disputes over inheritance, simple loss or theft. The fact that Marie Louise's emeralds made it through 106 years in the Habsburg-Lorraine family is actually kind of miraculous. In 1953, the Habsburg-Lorraine family finally decided to sell the emeralds. The buyer was Van Cleef & Arpels, one of the most prestigious jewelry houses in the world. Van Cleef & Arpels was founded in Paris in 1906 by Alfred Van Cleef, whose family was in the diamond business, and his brother-in-law Salomon Arpels. Alfred's sons, Charles Pierre and Julien Arpels, joined the business, and together they built it into a legendary name in high jewelry. Marie Louise's emeralds fit perfectly with Van Cleef & Arpels' brand. They had incredible provenance. Napoleon, Imperial, France, Exile. They were beautifully made by François Niteau, one of the great jewelers of the Napoleonic era, and they featured spectacular Colombian emeralds that any jewelry connoisseur would appreciate. Van Cleef & Arpels held onto the emeralds for over 50 years. They probably displayed them occasionally at exhibitions. They almost certainly used them as examples of their expertise in historic jewelry and their connection to the great jewelers of the past. They might have loaned them to museums for special exhibitions about Napoleonic art or 19th century jewelry, but they didn't alter them significantly or break them up. The emeralds remained intact as a set. And then, in 2004, the Louvre acquired the necklace and earrings. The Louvre acquiring Marie Louise's emeralds in 2004 was, in a way, bringing them home. The Louvre probably paid millions for them. The purchase price wasn't publicly disclosed, but Colombian emeralds of that size and quality, with that level of historical provenance, in their original early 19th century settings, easily worth multiple millions of dollars, possibly tens of millions depending on how the auction or negotiation went. But for the Louvre, it was worth it. These emeralds were part of French cultural heritage. They were tangible connections to one of the most significant periods in French history. They deserved to be preserved and displayed where the public could see them and learn their story. The Louvre put them on display in their jewelry gallery. with explanatory text about Marie Louise, Napoleon, the Empire, and the whole dramatic history. For 20 years, museum visitors from around the world could see these emeralds, could read about their journey from wedding gift to exile jewelry, to ducal inheritance, to Habsburg treasure, to Van Cleef and Arpels collection, to National Museum, could appreciate the craftsmanship of the settings, the beauty of the Colombian emeralds, the sparkle of hundreds of diamonds, could understand through these physical objects something about the people who wore them and the history they witnessed. And now they're gone, stolen by thieves with a basket lift. Somewhere out there right now, these emeralds, survivors of 215 years of European history, are wrapped in cloth or sitting in a box, separated from the public who should be able to see and appreciate. The tiara from this set is in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. But at some point, probably in the 19th century, possibly when the set was owned by the Habsburg-Lorraine family or maybe even earlier, someone removed all the emeralds from the tiara and replaced them with turquoise. Why? We don't know for certain. Maybe they needed money and sold the emeralds separately. Maybe the emeralds were damaged and turquoise was easier or cheaper to source as replacements. Maybe someone just really liked turquoise. Whatever the reason, the original emeralds from Marie Louise's tiara are long gone, lost to history, which makes the stolen necklace and earrings even more significant and irreplaceable. They're the only surviving pieces from Napoleon's emerald wedding gift to Marie Louise, the only complete original elements of what was once a full imperial parure, and now they're gone too. Now let's talk about the second major group of stolen items, the sapphire and diamond parure that belonged to Hortense de Beauharnais. And before we get into the jewelry itself, we need to talk about Hortense, because her life was its own level of complicated family drama that makes modern royal family situations look simple by comparison. Hortense de Beauharnais was born in 1783 in Paris. Her mother was Josephine, yes, that Josephine, Napoleon's first wife, the one he divorced to marry Marie Louise and the emeralds. Josephine's first husband was Alexandre de Beauharnais, a French aristocrat and military officer who was executed during the Reign of Terror in 1794. The French Revolution was not kind to aristocrats. Josephine was briefly imprisoned herself during this period, but survived. She was left a widow with 2 children, Eugenie, born 1781, and Hortense, born 1783. In 1796, Josephine married Napoleon Bonaparte, who at that point was a rising military star, but not yet the Napoleon we know from history books. Napoleon became stepfather to Eugenie and Hortense. By all accounts, Napoleon actually got along well with his stepchildren. He seems to have genuinely cared about them. He advanced Eugenie's military career and treated him almost like a son. He was fond of Hortense and involved in her upbringing and education. So Hortense grew up as Napoleon's stepdaughter during his rise from military commander to first consul to Emperor of France. She went from being the daughter of an executed aristocrat to being part of the imperial family. She was educated as a young lady of high status. Music, languages, art, all the accomplishments expected of women in her position. And then in 1802, Napoleon arranged for Hortense to marry his younger brother, Louis Bonaparte. Let's just pause here and appreciate how weird this is from a modern perspective. Napoleon essentially arranged a marriage between his stepdaughter and his brother, which made Louis both Hortense's husband and her step-uncle. Family trees in the Bonaparte-Beauharnais clan get complicated really fast. Louis Bonaparte was apparently not a great catch, personality-wise. Contemporary accounts describe him as jealous, controlling, moody, and generally difficult to live with. He and Hortense were apparently miserable together, almost from the start, but they did have 3 sons together: Napoleon Charles, Napoleon Louis, Charles Louis Napoleon, born 1808, who would eventually become Napoleon III, Emperor of France. But that's getting ahead of the story. In 1806, Napoleon made Louis the King of Holland, which sounds impressive. Being queen of a country is a pretty good deal, right? Except that Louis was apparently still terrible as a husband, and being Queen of Holland meant living in Holland, away from Paris and the social life Hortense had known. Louis lasted as King of Holland until 1810, when he abdicated or was forced out by Napoleon, depending on which account you read. Hortense and Louis separated. They never officially divorced, but they lived apart for the rest of their lives. Hortense spent much of the rest of her life in a sort of limbo. Technically, she was still married to Louis, so she couldn't remarry. She was no longer Queen of Holland. She was Napoleon's stepdaughter, which gave her status, but also made her politically problematic after Napoleon's fall. She lived in exile, moving around Europe, trying to stay out of political trouble, living on whatever income she could manage from properties and investments. She died in 1837 at age 54. Her sapphire and diamond parure was one of the valuable pieces she owned, possibly one of the few significant jewels she managed to keep through all the upheavals of her life. Here's where the story gets frustratingly vague. We don't actually know exactly when or how Hortense acquired her sapphire parure. We know the set existed by 1825 because there are records documenting. We know it included a tiara, necklace, and earrings, all featuring large Ceylon sapphires surrounded by diamonds set in gold. But we don't know who made it, or exactly when it was created, or whether Hortense commissioned it herself, or received it as a gift, or inherited it from someone. This kind of gap in provenance is actually pretty common with jewelry from this period, especially pieces owned by people whose lives were disrupted by political upheaval. Records get lost. Documentation disappears. People fleeing revolutions or living in exile don't always carefully preserve paperwork about their jewelry. What we do know is that by the time we have clear documentation, this was a spectacular set. Just like we talked about Colombian emeralds earlier, we need to talk about why Ceylon sapphires are special, because the distinction matters both for understanding the value of these pieces and for understanding why they'd be recognizable to experts. Ceylon sapphires come from Sri Lanka, which was called Ceylon until 1972. The island has been producing sapphires for over 2,000 years. They're mentioned in ancient texts, and sapphires from Ceylon have been prized throughout history. Sapphires are corundum, the same mineral as rubies. The difference is color. Red corundum is ruby. Blue corundum is sapphire. Corundum also comes in other colors: yellow, pink, orange, green, and those are called fancy sapphires, but blue is the classic and most valuable. Some Ceylon sapphires have a slight violet undertone, which is actually considered desirable by many collectors because it makes the color more complex and interesting. Like Colombian emeralds, Ceylon sapphires tend to be clearer than sapphire from many other sources. They have fewer visible inclusions, which makes them more attractive and valuable. That said, sapphires in general are clearer than emeralds. Emeralds almost always have visible inclusions, while it's possible to find essentially flawless sapphire. But Ceylon sapphires are particularly known for their clarity. In the early 19th century, when Hortense's set was made, Ceylon sapphires were already considered the gold standard, or perhaps blue standard, for fine sapphire. They were what you used if you wanted the best. The sapphires in Hortense's parure were described as large Ceylon sapphires. We're probably talking about stones of several carats each, not small accent stones, but significant gemstones that would be the focal points of each piece. Each sapphire was surrounded by diamonds set in gold, a classic design that makes the blue of the sapphires stand out even more dramatically by surrounding them with colorless, brilliant diamonds. The tiara, necklace, and earrings would have been designed as a matching set, meant to be worn together for maximum visual impact. When Hortense died in 1837, her sapphires were purchased by Louis-Philippe, Duke of Orléans. Now, Louis-Philippe is an interesting figure in French history. He was born into the Orléans branch of the French royal family, a cadet branch, meaning they were descended from a younger son of a king, rather than being in the direct line of succession. During the French Revolution and Napoleonic period, he'd lived in exile, wandering around Europe and even spending time in the United States. He apparently taught French in a school in Philadelphia for a while, which is a weird footnote in history. When the Bourbon monarchy was restored after Napoleon's fall, Louis-Philippe came back to France. He was wealthy, connected, and positioned as a more liberal alternative to the main Bourbon line. And in 1830, after another revolution kicked out King Charles X, Louis-Philippe became King of France. He styled himself as the citizen king, supposedly more in touch with ordinary people than the old-school Bourbon king. Whether this was actually true is debatable, but it was good PR. Louis-Philippe purchased Hortense's sapphires and gave them to his wife, Marie Amélie of Naples and Sicily. Marie Amélie was from Italian royalty, daughter of King Ferdinand I of the Two Sicilies. She'd married Louis-Philippe back in 1809, long before he became king, and she'd stuck with him through his years of exile and political uncertainty. When Louis-Philippe became King of France in 1830, Marie Amélie became Queen of France. And here's where the jewelry history gets delightfully circular. Marie Amélie, wearing Hortense's sapphires, became Queen of France, the same country where Hortense had once been Queen of Holland under Napoleon's empire. Different kingdoms, different political systems, different royal families, but the sapphires connected them. Marie Amélie wore the sapphire parure at various royal functions during Louis-Philippe's reign, 1830-1848. State dinners, balls, official portrait, occasions where a queen needed to look magnificent. The July monarchy, as Louis-Philippe's reign was called, was supposed to be more moderate and constitutional than previous French monarchies, but it still involved a lot of the same royal ceremony and display. Queens still wore tiaras and jewelry to state events. The sapphires were part of that royal performance. Then in 1848, revolution came again. France was really going through governments quickly in the 19th century. Monarchy, revolution, empire, republic, different monarchy, another revolution, another republic, another empire. It's exhausting just listing them. Louis-Philippe was overthrown in the February Revolution of 1848. He and Marie Amélie fled to Britain, where they lived in exile until their deaths. Louis-Philippe died in 1850, Marie Amélie in 1866. But the sapphires stayed with the family. The Orléans family maintained their wealth even in exile. They had properties, investments, art collections, jewelry. They remained important figures in French royalist circles even though they were no longer on any throne. And they kept the sapphire for 155 years, through everything, through the February Revolution of 1848 and the establishment of the Second Republic, through Louis Napoleon's coup in 1851 and his establishment of the Second Empire. Remember, Louis Napoleon was Hortense's son, so the sapphires that had belonged to his mother were now owned by a different royal family, while he ruled France as Napoleon III. Through the collapse of the Second Empire in 1870-71 and the establishment of the Third Republic, through World War I, 1914-1918, through the interwar period, through World War II, 1939-1945, and the German occupation of France, through the reconstruction of Europe and the social changes of the post-war period. Generation after generation of the Orléans family kept these sapphires, preserved them, passed them down, until 1985. In 1985, nearly 150 years after Marie Amélie first wore them as Queen of France, the Orléans family sold the sapphire parure to the Louvre. The purchase price wasn't publicly disclosed, but sapphires of this size and quality, with this level of historical provenance, in their original 19th century settings, easily worth millions. The Louvre was bringing together pieces of French royal and imperial history. They already had various items from different periods and regimes. Adding Hortense's sapphires meant they could tell more of the story of 19th century French jewellery and the complicated dynastic politics of the period. The sapphires went on display in the jewellery gallery, where they sat for nearly 40 years. Visitors could see them, read about their history, appreciate the beauty of Ceylon sapphires and the craftsmanship of 19th century jewellery making. And then, thieves took the tiara, the necklace, and one earring. Let's talk about that for a minute, because it's weird and kind of hilarious in a dark way. The thieves took one earring. Just one, not both earrings. One earring. What happened to the other one? Several possibilities. They might have dropped it. In the chaos of smashing display cases and grabbing jewellery and trying to get out quickly before security responded, someone dropped the second earring. It fell on the floor or rolled under something, and they didn't have time to find it. It might still be in the museum somewhere, wedged behind a case or in a corner. Someone grabbed it separately and lost it. Maybe one thief grabbed one earring and another thief grabbed the other earring, and then in the escape one of them dropped it or it fell out of their bag. It could be anywhere, in the museum, on the street outside, in the getaway vehicle between the seats. It's a two-person job, and they split up the pieces. Maybe the plan was always to separate the items to make them harder to track or identify as a complete theft. One person takes half, the other person takes half. They go different directions, except then you have one random earring which is essentially useless without its mate. It broke or was damaged and they left it behind. Earrings can be fragile, especially antique earrings with elaborate setting. Maybe when they grabbed it or when they were escaping, the earring got damaged and they decided it wasn't worth taking if it was broken. Any of these scenarios is plausible, and all of them are kind of absurd, because now somewhere out there's a Ceylon sapphire and diamond earring that belongs to a set owned by two queens of France, and it's separated from its mate. Earrings are valuable as a pair. A single earring, even an antique, historically significant one, is much harder to sell or value appropriately because it's incomplete. Sure, you could theoretically wear a single earring. Asymmetrical earrings are sometimes fashionable, but you're not going to wear a 200-year-old royal sapphire earring that's been stolen from the Louvre casually out to brunch. And for a collector, a single earring from a famous pair is frustrating. You have half of something, which is better than nothing, but worse than having the complete set. Insurance adjusters are probably having aneurysms trying to figure out how to value one earring from a historically significant pair, whereabouts of the mate unknown. It's the kind of detail that would be funny if it weren't so sad. These incredible pieces of jewellery, survivors of nearly 200 years of history, and one earring just disappears somewhere along the way. And now we get to the bulk of the stolen items, the jewellery that belonged to Empress Eugénie, wife of Napoleon III. If Marie Louise's story is about being thrust into an impossible position and surviving with grace, and Hortense's story is about being caught in the middle of family and political drama, Eugenie's story is about being fabulous, fashionable, politically influential, and then losing absolutely everything when your husband's empire collapses. Let's start with Eugenie herself because she's fascinating. Eugenie de Montijo was born in Granada, Spain, in 1826. Her full name was Doña María Eugenia Ignacia Augustina de Palafox y Kirkpatrick, because Spanish aristocratic names are comprehensive, but everyone called her Eugenie. Her family was Spanish nobility. Her father was a count, but they weren't royalty. They were wealthy and well-connected, but they weren't in line for any thrones. Eugenie grew up beautiful, intelligent, well-educated, and fashionable. She travelled around Europe with her mother. Her father died when she was a teenager, spent time in Paris, and generally lived the life of a wealthy, aristocratic young woman in the 1840s, 50s. In 1853, she married Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, who had recently crowned himself Emperor Napoleon III of France. Louis Napoleon was the son of Hortense de Beauharnais, yes, the Sapphire Woman, and Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. So he was Napoleon the Fair's nephew. He'd spent much of his life in exile or in political prison, because being related to Napoleon was politically complicated in France. But he'd eventually gotten himself elected president of France, then staged a coup, then held a referendum to establish the Second Empire with himself as emperor. It was audacious, constitutionally questionable, and somehow it worked. He needed an empress. He wanted to marry into European royalty to legitimize his position. But the old established royal families weren't interested in marrying their daughters to an upstart Bonaparte. So he married Eugenie, who was beautiful, charming, fashionable, and made him happy, even if she wasn't technically a princess. The French public loved her. She became a fashion icon. Whatever Eugenie wore, wealthy women across Europe wanted to wear. She popularized crinolines, those huge skirts supported by hoops. She set trends in jewelry, hairstyles, colors, fabrics. She was basically the 19th century equivalent of a fashion influencer with millions of followers. She was also politically intelligent. Napoleon III consulted her on various issues. She served as regent, ruling in his place. 3 times when he was away from France. She had opinions and wasn't shy about expressing them. She gave birth to a son in 1856, Louis Napoleon, Prince Imperial, the heir to the empire. For nearly 20 years, Eugenie was Empress of France during a period of significant economic growth, cultural achievement, and social change. Paris was transformed under the Second Empire. Baron Haussmann redesigned the city, creating the grand boulevards and unified architecture we associate with Paris today. The Paris Opera was built. France expanded its empire overseas. It was called the Second Empire, and for a while, it seemed glorious and stable. And then it all fell apart in 1870. France declared war on Prussia in July 1870. It was a disaster. The French army was defeated repeatedly. By September, Napoleon III was captured at the Battle of Sedan. Actually captured. The Emperor of France, taken prisoner by the Prussians. In Paris, people rioted. The Second Empire was declared dissolved. The Third Republic was proclaimed. Eugenie, who had been serving as regent in Paris while Napoleon III was with the army, had to flee. She escaped through Paris in disguise, according to various accounts. Some say she was dressed as a regular woman. Some say she had help from her American dentist, Dr. Evans. The details vary. She made it to the coast and got on a boat to England. Her husband was released from Prussia eventually and joined her in exile in England. Their son was with them. They never returned to France as rulers. Napoleon III died in 1873. Their son, the Prince Imperial, was killed in 1879, fighting in the Zulu War in South Africa. He joined the British Army, and his death, in a relatively minor skirmish, was tragic and shocking. Eugenie lived until 1920. She was in exile for 49 years, longer than she'd been empress. But here's the thing. When Eugenie fled Paris in 1870, she left most of her possessions behind, including her jewelry. She took what she could carry, what she could grab quickly, but the bulk of her jewelry collection, pieces she'd worn as empress, pieces that had been given to her or that she'd commissioned, stayed in Paris. And after the empire fell, the new French Republic decided to sell off a lot of the imperial property, including jewelry. Some of it was sold in the 1880s-90s. Some of it was eventually returned to Eugenie. Some of it ended up scattered across the world in private collections, before eventually making its way to museums. The pieces that were stolen from the Louvre all date from the 1850s, the height of the Second Empire, when Eugenie was young and powerful, and at the center of European culture. Let's talk about each piece, because they all have their own wild stories. The single most spectacular piece that was stolen was Empress Eugenie's pearl and diamond tiara. This was commissioned as a wedding present for Eugenie in 1853 by Alexandre Gabriel Lemonnier, a Parisian jeweler who worked for the Imperial court. The wedding took place in January 1853 at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the same Notre Dame that tragically burned in 2019 but is being restored. It was a massive state occasion. Napoleon III was cementing his position as emperor by marrying publicly, spectacularly, and Eugenie needed jewelry appropriate for becoming Empress of France. This tiara would have been worn at her wedding and at various major state occasions throughout her reign. Let's talk about what makes it so extraordinary. The tiara contains 212 pearls, including 17 large pear-shaped ones and 1,198 diamonds. The stones are set in silver, standard for diamond jewelry in the 19th century, because silver shows off white stones better than gold, which can cast a slight yellow tone, and backed with gold foil, a technique that enhances sparkle by reflecting light back through the diamonds. Under candlelight, remember, in 1853, electric lighting didn't exist. Evening events were lit by candles, oil lamps, maybe gas lighting. This tiara would have created an absolutely stunning effect. Every time Eugenie moved her head, nearly 2,000 points of light would catch and scatter, creating a kind of halo of brilliance. We've talked about emeralds and sapphires, so let's talk about pearls, because they're different from other gemstones in important ways. Pearls are organic. They're created by living creatures, oysters and mussels, rather than formed in the earth like minerals. When an irritant gets inside an oyster's shell, the oyster secretes layers of nacre, mother of pearl, around it as a defense mechanism. Over months or years, this builds up into a pearl. In the 19th century, all pearls were natural pearls, pearls that formed randomly in wild oysters. Cultured pearls, where people deliberately induce pearl formation by inserting an irritant into an oyster, weren't commercially produced until the early 20th century. Natural pearls are incredibly rare. Only a tiny percentage of oysters ever produce pearls, and only a fraction of those pearls are gem quality, large enough, well-shaped enough, and lustrous enough to be valuable in jewelry. For this tiara, Lemonnier would have needed to source 212 high-quality natural pearls, including 17 large pear-shaped ones. This would have taken significant time. Pearl dealers would have had to gather them from various sources: Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, freshwater sources in Europe, various other locations where pearls were harvested. The fact that this tiara contains so many fine pearls, all well matched in terms of colour and lustre, tells us that no expense was spared. Napoleon III wanted his bride to have something absolutely spectacular, and money was no object. The overall effect would have been elaborate, feminine, and imperially magnificent, exactly right for an empress's wedding tiara. After Eugenie fled France in 1870-71, this tiara was eventually sold. In 1890, it was purchased by Albert, Prince of Thurn, on Taxis. The Thurn and Taxis family deserves a moment of attention because their source of wealth is both unexpected and fascinating. They made their fortune running the mail. Seriously, postal service. The family originated in Italy. Taxis was originally an Italian family name. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, they established a postal system for the Holy Roman Empire, a network of couriers and postal stations that allowed letters and packages to be delivered across vast distances more reliably and quickly than random messengers. They held a monopoly on postal services in parts of the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. They charged for the service. They expanded the network. They got rich from it. By the 19th century, they'd transformed that postal fortune and strategic marriages into various noble families, into a full aristocratic position. They had the title of prince, territories in what's now Germany, properties, art collections, and enough wealth to buy imperial jewelry at auction. It's one of those stories that sounds implausible, becoming aristocracy through running the mail, but it's true. They were so successful at postal service that they became one of the great families of the German-speaking world. The tiara remained with the Thurn-on-Taxis family for over a century, from 1890 to 1992, enduring significant historical events such as the twilight of the German Empire, World War I, and Germany's defeat, the economic chaos of the Weimar Republic, the Nazi period and World War II, post-war divided Germany, the Cold War, and German reunification in 1990. Through all of this, someone in the family kept this tiara safe, preserved it, and didn't sell it, even when selling it might have been financially tempting. In 1992, the family decided to sell it at Sotheby's. The Louvre purchased it at that auction, bringing it back to France 122 years after Eugenie had worn it as Empress. It had been on display for 32 years when it was stolen last week. And finally, let's talk about the piece that almost got stolen but didn't quite make it, the crown of the Empress. This crown was made in 1855 for the Paris Exposition Universelle, Universal Exposition, which was basically a world's fair, countries showing off their achievements in industry, arts, culture, science, and technology. France wanted to demonstrate its wealth, power, sophistication, and superior craftsmanship. What better way than to commission a spectacular crown that showed off the finest French jeweler's art? The crown is made of gold, set with diamonds and emeralds, and features diamond palmettes, those fan-shaped decorative elements we've mentioned before, alternating with imperial eagles. The eagles are important symbolically. They were the symbol of the Bonaparte dynasty. Napoleon had used the eagle as his imperial emblem, deliberately echoing ancient Rome's use of eagles as symbols of military and imperial power. When Napoleon III established the Second Empire, he adopted the eagle too, continuing the family symbol. So this crown was propaganda as much as it was jewelry. Look at France. Look at our empire. Look at our craftsmen. Look at our wealth. We are powerful. We are legitimate. We are worthy of respect and admiration. Empress Eugénie never actually wore it. It was too much. Too heavy. Gold and gemstones aren't light. Too big and awkward. Too specifically designed for display rather than actual use. It lived in the imperial collection as a symbolic object, something to be exhibited, to demonstrate imperial grandeur, to impress visitors and foreign dignitaries, but not something to actually wear to events. When the Second Empire fell in 1870-71 and the new Third Republic started liquidating imperial property, most of the imperial jewelry was sold at auction to raise funds. But this crown wasn't sold. It was given back to Eugenie, probably because it was too obviously aggressively Napoleonic, too connected to the Second Empire, too covered in imperial eagles. Nobody else would want to buy it. It wasn't subtle or versatile. It screamed, "I am Bonapartist imperial propaganda," in a way that made it essentially unsellable. Eugenie kept it through her long exile. When she died in 1920, 49 years after fleeing France, she bequeathed the crown to Princess Marie Clotilde Bonaparte, another member of the extended Bonaparte family. Marie Clotilde was exactly the kind of person who would appreciate and preserve something so connected to the family's imperial history. She held onto it for decades, until 1988, when she sold it to Roberto Polo. Roberto Polo was a Cuban-born art and antiques collector with particular interest in Napoleonic and French imperial objects. He built a significant collection of items related to the Bonaparte family and French imperial history, and he donated the crown to the Louvre, bringing it into the national collection where it belonged. It was a long journey to get to the Louvre. It was initially created as a display piece for the 1855 Paris Exposition and was part of the imperial collection, though never worn by Empress Eugénie. After the fall of the empire, it was returned to Eugenie. Upon her death, it was bequeathed to Princess Marie Clotilde Bonaparte, who later sold it to Roberto Polo. Roberto Polo then donated it to the Louvre, and last week, thieves tried to steal it. They grabbed it, probably in a rush trying to get everything on their list quickly before security responded, or they ran out of time. And they dropped it. It broke, probably diamonds and emeralds scattered. The gold structure likely bent or cracked. And the thieves made a split-second decision. Not worth it. It's damaged. It's large and awkward to carry. It's heavy. Even intact, it would be nearly impossible to sell. It's too recognizable, too specific, too blatantly, I am a Napoleonic crown with imperial eagles. Broken? Definitely not worth the trouble or the extra time to try to gather up the pieces. So they left it and ran with everything else. The crown is still at the Louvre, damaged, but there, still a witness to history, now also a witness to this particular theft, the piece that got away. In a weird way, it's fitting. This crown was always more symbol than functional object, made to be looked at, admired, used to demonstrate power and wealth and legitimacy, and now it's a physical reminder of this heist, the piece the thieves couldn't quite manage to steal. Now let's talk about what actually happens after a heist like that, because the aftermath is more complicated than most people realize. First, who pays for this and how much? Museums like the Louvre have insurance policies covering their collections, but insuring art, antiques, and historic artifacts is incredibly complex. Some pieces are so valuable and unique that they're essentially uninsurable at market rate. No insurance company wants to take on the risk of paying out hundreds of millions or billions of dollars if something happens to, say, the Mona Lisa or the Venus de Milo. Those pieces are usually either self-insured by the museum government, meaning they bear the cost themselves if something happens, or insured for a fraction of their true value, because full insurance would be prohibitively expensive. For pieces that are insured through normal policies, the insurance company has to assess the value of what was stolen. This gets extremely complicated because jewelry like this has multiple types of value that don't always align. For example, the material value. What are the raw materials worth if you broke up the pieces and sold everything separately? For Marie Louise's emerald necklace, 32 Colombian emeralds, multiple carats each, highest quality, 1:1 138 diamonds, brilliant and rose-cut, gold setting. The emeralds alone could be worth millions depending on their exact size and quality. The diamonds add more millions. The gold adds some additional value. You're looking at material value easily in the millions just for that one necklace. These pieces were made by master jewelers in the 19th century. François Niteau, Alfred Bapst, François Kramer, Alexandre Gabriel Lemonnier. The settings are works of art in themselves. The design, the techniques used, the execution, all of that has value beyond the material. A painting isn't just worth the cost of canvas and paint. Jewelry isn't just worth melted gold and loose stones. And the historical value, which is arguably the most important type of value, and also the hardest to quantify financially. These pieces belong to empresses. They witnessed major historical events. Marie Louise's emeralds were there when Napoleon's empire collapsed. Eugenie's tiara was worn at her wedding to Napoleon III. Hortense's sapphires belonged to two queens of France. How do you put a dollar amount on this necklace was worn by Napoleon's wife when she fled the fall of the empire? What's that story worth? How do you price these diamonds came from Cardinal Mazarin's 17th century collection? You can't look these up on eBay or check comparable sales because there are no comparables. These pieces are unique. Insurance companies hate trying to value items like this because there's no objective market price. They have to bring in appraisers, gemologists, auction house experts, art historians, jewelry specialists, people who can give informed professional opinions about value. And even then, the final number is somewhat arbitrary. My educated guess based on similar pieces. The total value of all the stolen items combined is probably somewhere between $50 million and $150 million, possibly more if you weigh heavily toward historical significance. The insurance payout, if the pieces aren't recovered and if they're fully insured, will be substantial, but also probably less than the true value because you literally cannot replace these items. Insurance can give you money, but it can't give you back Marie Louise's emeralds or Eugenie's wedding tiara. As soon as the theft was discovered and authorities were notified, information about the stolen pieces went into multiple international databases, the world's largest private database of stolen art, antiques, and collectibles. It's used by auction houses, dealers, insurance companies, and law enforcement worldwide. When something is registered as stolen here, anyone checking before buying or selling will see it's stolen property. Interpol maintains records and circulates information to law enforcement agencies in its member countries, which is almost every country. This ensures that if these pieces surface anywhere in the world, local police will know they're stolen. Major museums have their own networks for sharing information about thefts, security concerns, and suspicious activity. Major auction houses like Sotheby's, Christie's, Bonhams maintain their own records of stolen items and check these before accepting consignments. The point of all these systems, make it as difficult as possible to sell stolen items through any legitimate channel. If you try to auction these pieces or sell them to a reputable dealer, they'll check the databases, see they're stolen, and either refuse the transaction or contact authorities. This is why stealing famous art and jewelry is so much harder to profit from than stealing, say, cash or cryptocurrency. The items are tagged in systems worldwide, and anyone legitimate won't touch them. So how might these pieces be recovered? The first scenario would be law enforcement tracking. Down the thieves, investigators are presumably reviewing surveillance footage from the Louvre and surrounding streets, interviewing witnesses, checking traffic cameras, following digital traces, building a timeline of the theft. Modern forensics and surveillance make it harder to pull off high-profile thefts than it used to be. Security cameras are everywhere. License plate recognition systems track vehicles. Cell phone data can place people at locations. DNA evidence and fingerprints can be recovered from crime scenes. If the thieves left any physical evidence or digital traces, investigators have tools to follow those leads. If they can identify and apprehend the thieves quickly enough, the jewelry might still be together, unsold, and can be recovered intact. That said, professional thieves are aware of these risks and take precautions. Gloves to avoid fingerprints, masks or disguises for cameras, stolen or fake license plate, careful planning to minimize traces. Scenario 2. The pieces surface in the market. Even if the thieves initially get away, they eventually have to do something with the jewelry. They can't just keep it forever. The whole point of theft is usually profit. If they try to sell through any legitimate channel, those channels check databases. Auction houses have entire departments dedicated to provenance research and stolen property checks. Reputable jewelers won't touch items that might be stolen because the legal liability isn't worth it. If they try to sell to private collectors, there's still risk. Many serious collectors are careful about provenance, specifically because they don't want legal problems. If you knowingly buy stolen property, you can be criminally charged. If you unknowingly buy it, you'll still have to return it once it's identified, and you lose your money. Sometimes stolen pieces do surface years or decades later. Someone tries to sell an heirloom, and it's recognized. Someone dies, and heirs find items they didn't know were stolen. Sometimes thieves or buyers get cold feet and arrange returns. The hope is that one of these scenarios plays out. Someone tries to sell a large Colombian emerald with very specific characteristics, and a jeweler recognizes it from the stolen items list. Scenario 3. The thieves panic and return the items. This might sound unlikely, but it actually happens more often than you'd think. Sometimes thieves steal something high profile, then realize they've made a terrible mistake. The heat is too intense. Every law enforcement agency is looking. The pieces are too famous and too recognizable. They can't sell them without getting caught. In some cases, thieves abandon the stolen goods, leave them in a storage unit, bury them somewhere, stash them, and walk away. In other cases, they arrange anonymous returns through lawyers or intermediaries, sometimes in exchange for reduced charges or immunity. The scream by Edvard Munch was stolen from a Norwegian museum in 2004 by armed robbers who just walked in during the day and took it off the wall. It was recovered in 2006, damaged but recovered, after the thieves apparently realized they couldn't sell it. There have been cases of stolen art found years later in unexpected places, abandoned in attics, left in storage units, hidden in random locations, because the thieves couldn't figure out what else to do with them. The hope is that whoever took these pieces will realize that actually profiting from this theft is essentially impossible and will find a way to return them before making everything worse. For now, the investigation continues. Authorities are following leads, working international networks, coordinating with art crime specialists across agencies and countries. The international jewelry and art community is on alert. Auction houses have the alert in their systems. Dealers have been notified. Gemologists who might be asked to evaluate large emeralds or sapphires or pearls know to be suspicious and check carefully. Private collectors approached with suspiciously good deals on rare, special pieces with amazing provenance hopefully will be smart enough to verify everything thoroughly before buying. And somewhere, the thieves are presumably realizing that the heist was the easy part. Figuring out what to do with stolen imperial jewelry, that's much, much harder. So that's the story of the Paris jewel heist. What was stolen, why these pieces matter, how they survived centuries of history, only to be taken by thieves with a basket lift. These jewels witnessed empires rise and fall. They survived revolutions, wars, exiles, regime changes. They belonged to empresses who navigated impossible political situations, who fled collapsing governments, who preserved these treasures through circumstances that would have destroyed lesser items. Marie Louise's emeralds travelled from Napoleon's imperial wedding gift to Austrian exile, to centuries with the Habsburgs, to Van Cleef and Arpels to the Louvre. They witnessed the rise and fall of Napoleon's empire from the inside. Hortense's sapphires passed through 2 queens of France and 155 years with the Orléans family, surviving multiple political systems and 2 world wars. Eugenie's collection, her brooch with 200-year-old Mazarin diamonds, her bow that once belonged to Mrs. Astor, who ruled New York society, her wedding tiara with nearly 2,000 diamonds and over 200 pearls, survived the fall of the Second Empire and journeys across continents before returning home to France. They're not just jewelry, they're tangible connections to people and moments that shaped European history. They're witnesses to the past, preserved so future generations could learn from them and understand the people who wore them. And now they're in someone's possession who probably has no idea how to handle such impossible treasures. But there's reason for hope. These pieces are too famous, too distinctive, too meticulously documented to disappear forever. If they surface anywhere legitimate, they'll be recognized immediately. If the thieves try to break them up, the individual stones, those Colombian emeralds, those Ceylon sapphires, those documented pearls, are traceable. If they approach serious collectors, most will check provenance because nobody wants to buy stolen imperial jewelry and face the legal consequences. The jewelry has survived everything else history threw at it. Civil wars, empire collapses, revolutions, 2 world wars, economic crises, social upheavals, changes in fashion and politics and everything else. Maybe it'll survive this too. Sleep well, wherever you are. And if you happen to spot some suspiciously imperial-looking emeralds at your local pawn shop, or if someone offers you a fantastic deal on Ceylon sapphires that definitely, totally aren't stolen from the Louvre, maybe give the authorities a call. Good night.